Hi, everybody. This is Heather. Thanks so much for joining us today for our discussion on social media and online ambassadors. I'm really glad that you were able to tune into our discussion today. Before we dive in, I'm just going to take a minute to introduce myself for those of you who haven't listened to any of our recorded discussions in the past. I'm Heather Fields, and I've been working on Giving Tuesday for 4 years. And by way of background, in 2013, I was the quarterback of a Giving Tuesday campaign for the city of Baltimore, which had the goal of raising $1 million. And really thrilled to say that we had hundreds of nonprofits who ended up participating with us, foundations and higher ed community leaders. We all joined together in the campaign, and we ultimately raised nearly $6 million. So it was a really exciting campaign, and I learned a lot. And since that time, I've been sharing the tools and the playbooks that we created for that campaign with other campaign leaders around the world. But for the last 2 years specifically, I've focused most of my time on higher ed outreach for the 92I, who are the founders of Giving Tuesday. And in this role, I publish free resources and I do these recordings to try to bring to you some advice and expertise and best practices from the campaigns that I'm able to see from my vantage point working with higher ed institutions. And if you're not familiar, we publish free tools and resources 2 times a month. And we also promote those resources from the Giving Tuesday website, which is givingtuesday.org. So if you haven't had a chance to go out and familiarize yourself with the Giving Tuesday site, it's really chock full of great free resources and templates and case studies. So have a look at that. At the same time, if you have ideas for new tools or case studies you'd like us to provide, let me know. I'm going to share my email at the end of this presentation, and I'd love to hear from you. Just let us know how we can help. We're a free resource for you to help you with your campaign planning. But I want to take just a quick step back before I turn it over to our speaker today. It's been really exciting to watch Giving Tuesday over the last few years. It's really growing steadily. In fact, last year we had 98 countries and territories participate in Giving Tuesday, with millions of people worldwide donating to amazing organizations, and also donating volunteer hours and hosting other inspiring acts of giving and generosity on the day. And as you can see on this slide, the data shows that Giving Tuesday is a really important day of impact on the giving calendar. One thing we hear from our higher ed leaders who join campaigns is, that they're able to create a bigger impact year over year. And many are actually joining together with their local communities and civic campaigns as well to have an even bigger impact. But as you can see from the graphics, data from our Giving Tuesday partner shows that Giving Tuesday is growing in terms of donors looking for places to engage and to give on Giving Tuesday. We see growth in donation dollars, the number of donors, as well as social media engagements, and as I mentioned earlier, those acts of generosity. But one thing we've observed over the last 5 years that sort of holds true is that organizations who plan ahead to participate on Giving Tuesday are better able to capitalize on this behavior and host the most successful Giving Tuesday campaigns. Which leads me to today's discussion. I'm really excited to introduce Caryn Stein to you. Caryn is Vice President of Marketing at Ruffalo Noel Levitz, and she brings a lot of experience working with nonprofits. I actually had the pleasure of working with Caryn at Network for Good several years ago, and I can tell you her expertise in helping nonprofits is really incredible. I know she worked with thousands of nonprofits there to help them improve communications with their supporters, leading to some really amazing outcomes. So, Caryn, welcome. Before we dive in, I was hoping you could tell the audience a little bit more about you and about RNL.
Definitely. So thank you so much, Heather. I'm really excited to join today, and it's great to be able to work with you again. So thanks for inviting me here. So I'll give you a little bit of background about Ruffalo Noel Levitz. We work with colleges and universities as well as nonprofits and healthcare organizations to really help them do two key things. And that includes enrollment marketing and how do they attract and acquire the right students for their programs and make sure that they're successful, and then also then engage their alumni and community to give back to the institution. And so we really work on that on a couple different levels to think about how do you leverage advanced analytics and use data to do that more intelligently and more effectively? How do you use things like marketing technology and engagement platforms to be able to reach the right people at the right time with the right message? And we'll talk a little bit about that today. And then really thinking about what are the insights that you can glean from doing all of that. So every time we're working on a campaign, we're getting smarter each time. We're always learning, and we're always making sure that we're rolling in those insights to the next thing that we do. And so that's in a nutshell what we do here at RNL. And I am very fortunate to be here as the Vice President of Marketing. As Heather, you mentioned, my background has been largely focused on digital marketing, digital media, digital outreach, and I've been doing this for almost 20 years, which is somewhat hard to believe. But so I've had a pretty wide range of experience using various platforms, connecting communities together, and then really starting to think about how to rally those communities and leverage that technology, not just for consumer purposes, but for really thinking about how do we leverage that for fundraising, how do we leverage that for social impact. And that's what is really exciting, and why I am always excited and eager to work with folks like Giving Tuesday to think about how do we take what we know from all kinds of disciplines and apply it forward for such a big movement like Giving Tuesday. So that's a little bit about me in a nutshell. And when we think about that, I think, go ahead, sorry. When we think about that, I think about, what are some of the platforms and techniques that we can use across the board to really amplify something like Giving Tuesday? It's already such a huge movement. A lot of folks are aware of it, but then how do we get the most out of it, particularly when we might have competing priorities, we have multiple campaigns running. I'm sure many of you listening have small teams, and you're wondering, I'm excited, I want to take advantage of this opportunity, but how do I do it? So I'm going to talk about a few things today that I think will help you really extend your reach and amplify your message and really get the most out of Giving Tuesday, not just as a fundraising event, but really as an event that helps you rally your community and build excitement and really build affinity moving forward. This is an experience that I think anyone who's involved with it, really, it sticks with them. And I think that builds into a relationship and a memory for organizations and higher education institutions that's hard to replicate. And that's why I think that Giving Tuesday is really so effective. Someone can be a part of something much bigger than themselves, but still have a very tangible individual impact. And so the first thing that we wanted to talk about today was really how do we leverage social media, and why is it important, and why is it particularly important when we think about a giving day like Giving Tuesday. And to me, it's because social media has the flexibility and has the reach to help us answer a few key questions that we really need to always be thinking about when we're asking our audience and our community to take action. Now, for most of my career, that's been about fundraising, but that can be about volunteering, that can be about just getting involved, that can be about sharing the message. And so the three questions that come up to me are, the question of why me? And we think about what fundraising really is and why people get involved with causes and organizations that they love. And to some degree, it's really around why it's relevant to them. It's shaped by their experience. It's shaped by what meaning that it has for them. And so let's think about how social media, and we can leverage social media to answer that question. How is this relevant to me as a donor? How is it relevant to me as a student or an alumni? And with social media, we can allow people to not just interact with our organization, but to also express that themselves, and that's very powerful for them to be able to not just receive a broadcast message, but to participate in the conversation. The second question that social media helps us not only be able to answer, but also understand more information about what's relevant to our community is this question of who says. And so particularly for something like Giving Tuesday, it really comes back to the messenger. And who is the person delivering your message, and why are they credible with the audience that you're trying to reach? Why are they believable, and why would they have influence over that audience. And this is a really powerful thing, and you see this a lot, particularly in things like peer-to-peer fundraising campaigns and grassroots advocacy efforts. The people delivering those messages are chosen specifically because they have something in common with the audience that you're trying to reach. So it's kind of this concept of, people like us, if I'm the messenger, we do things like this. And that's a very powerful statement that helps excite people into action. And then the third question, and I think this is particularly relevant for Giving Tuesday, but really across the board, is answering the question, why now? Well, Giving Tuesday itself has a natural built-in sense of urgency, but social media is a perfect channel for quick communications, in-the-moment communications, thinking about how do we leverage excitement and really some of the impulsivity that people have to take action in the moment, to understand a sense of urgency and understand why should they take action now versus later. What will happen as a result of taking action immediately versus waiting? And what's the reward for that? And sometimes the reward for that ties into the first two questions. It's really about how can I be part of the movement? How can I be part of the community? And we know that social media does this really well, and there are a couple reasons why that is. So one of the things I was, I think, really fascinated about recently came out were some stats, and this is an image that shows some information about where we spend our time when we're on mobile. And I often ask organizations, are you doing mobile fundraising? And they think about it a little bit, and they're like, well, not really. We haven't gone there yet. And I always counter that. It's a little bit of a trick question, I will confess, is that if you are reaching out through social, you are reaching out through mobile, because the primary amount of time that is being spent on mobile is being spent on apps that are social, right? It's being spent on Facebook. It's being spent on things like Snapchat or messaging or Twitter or other things. And so the graph on the screen really shows that we're spending about 5 hours a day on mobile, which I believe is true. I can confess that I probably spend that or more on my smartphone. But when we think about that, we also have to think about the immediacy of mobile, and it's tied to that urgency, right? We have mobile and we have social, and they're intrinsically tied together. And so it's really important to remember that, because that is true. We have the opportunity to reach people anywhere, anytime. Right, and so that was true to some degree with social when it was a little bit more skewed to desktop applications, but it's even more important now because people are spending so much time using their smartphone to communicate, and this shows, the primary things that they're spending on our social, as well as email and other things. But, think about your own use of mobile. Think about, your students, your alumni, people that you're trying to reach, where they're spending their time. So that's really important to remember, and I think it really represents an incredible opportunity, particularly for something like Giving Tuesday. So let's think about some ways to amplify through social, and it's really around extending your reach and extending the excitement, and how do you build on that? And so Heather did mention, really thinking about planning ahead and trying to figure out, now is the time to do that. And now's really the time to figure out what are your goals, what's your story, and start to plan an editorial calendar around that. How will you use various social networks, and we'll talk a little bit about that, to build off of the messages that you're already going to be distributing through other channels? So you will have your website, you will have your email, you might have a newsletter that you're sending out, you might have events. How do your social media postings tie into that, so that everywhere someone goes, they're seeing a reinforced message? And we know that by seeing that reinforced message, that people are going to be more likely to act on that message. It takes a few times, and what I like to call, the surround sound effect, to really get people pulled in. The second thing I would say is think about how to use tools to automate some of that posting, right? Particularly for folks that are thinking, like, I don't have a person that is just sitting there posting on social media all day. We're all doing double, triple duty. And, I think using tools like Hootsuite, like some of the other social media management tools, to start to schedule that out according to your editorial calendar gives you some flexibility to focus your on time for reacting to those posts and having conversations with people and engaging your champions. And so, thinking about how to automate some of that throughout the lead up to and through Giving Tuesday, I think is going to be really important. Really thinking about how to maximize your time and get more from your efforts. And then to that, point number 3 is really social media it's not best used as a broadcast channel. It's best used as a way to interact and communicate with your folks, not just to those people. And so I really encourage everyone as much as they can to participate in that conversation, because I think you'll learn a lot about what's meaningful to those groups that you want to engage for that particular movement. So make sure you're able to participate in that conversation. Again, with some of these tools like Hootsuite and others, you can find ways to do some social listening. And so what are the phrases that you might want to use? What's the hashtag that you might want to set up for your Giving Tuesday campaign? And just go ahead and get that set up front. And that way you can really focus, again, more of your time on that active nurturing throughout the lead up as well as during the day. The other thing that we've seen be really successful, and I think we're really coming into a moment with social media and with digital outreach that we've reached, I guess I would call, critical mass on this idea of how do you amplify through owned, earned, and paid social channels. And by that I just mean you have your own social media account, your Twitter account, your Facebook account, your LinkedIn, whatever it might be, your Instagram, and you're posting through that, and you're posting this organic owned content, and that's great, and that's what you're going to be automating some of it, and you're going to be reacting to some of it. The earned, we're going to talk a little bit more about when we talk about point number 5 and dig in a little bit more there, but that's also about tapping into influencers and getting coverage through maybe some local media or some other relevant outlets that would help promote that through their own social channels. And then paid social, and so there are many ways that you can do paid social, and I'll share a couple of those. But of course you've got Facebook sponsored posts, you've got sponsored posts on Twitter, you've got other ways that you can amplify that even further beyond just simply posting it. And I think it's important to have all 3 of those. I think if you can pick off a few strategies for each of those 3 social activities, I think you're going to see much better results because it really will help you make sure that you're always present within the conversation stream for the people that you're trying to reach. And then number 5 is really about this idea of tapping your ambassadors to reach beyond your own network. So we each have our own audience and our own network, but how do we use our network to reach into their networks and into their networks, into their networks? And that's really, to me, the most exciting thing about social, and really, I think, one of the most exciting things about Giving Tuesday, which we've seen such an incredible effect. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But first I wanted to share just a little bit about how some of this paid social works. And so this really gets back into digital advertising and how we're getting really smart about how we do that. And one of the key things to remember about any kind of paid social or digital advertising is the idea of targeting. Right? It's not just as if you don't want to send the same email message to everybody that you know. We've kind of grown up beyond the pray and spray approach of fund marketing. It's the same concept here. And so it's really about identifying your target audience and deploying those ads that are most relevant to them where they are and where that's going to show up for them. And I think this has really evolved to a point where we have the scale and efficiency that this doesn't have to be a Herculean effort. I would definitely recommend that you work with a provider to do this, because I think it's going to take a lot of the work off of you, and there is a cost associated with that. But I think we've found that it really reaps a lot of benefits for campaigns, particularly for Giving Day campaigns like Giving Tuesday. And this allows you to always be present. That ad's going to show up, and it's going to show up to the right people, and you're not wasting money on impressions for people that aren't even in your target market. That's just not effective outreach. So that's, in terms of digital advertising. And these things will be deployed, obviously, throughout any kind of website that someone might visit, but often also getting targeted and optimized through social media like Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, anywhere that audience might be. And so you get an incredible amount of reach there. A key thing, I think, particularly for Giving Tuesday, is a concept called retargeting. And I think we've all had this experience that we have. Now, I'll use my own example. I have been shopping for shoes, and I leave. Somehow I've left to not purchase those shoes, and I get that ad again, to remind me that I really wanted those shoes. And so this is the same concept, but we're leveraging that same technology and that same reach for a really good cause, and something that people have a more personal and emotional affinity to. And retargeting is really thinking about how do we put a little bit of code on our websites, particularly our giving pages, right, for Giving Tuesday, and then recapture those people. They may leave. We might have some cart abandonment. We might have those people get distracted. They may have to run into their next class, their next meeting. But we want to make sure that we're recapturing their attention and bringing them back. And so retargeting can help us do that. And again, those retargeting messages, those advertisements, are going to be deployed where those people are, not all over the place, not to everyone in the universe, but to those particular people where they are, on social media, on the websites that they visit, and even through mobile apps. And so this is, we found, to be a very effective way to bring those people back, get them to complete the gift. And we've actually seen some really interesting results on overall response lift, as well as increases in average gift size. So I'm really excited about this, and I think, like I said, we've reached a moment where this has become something that I think is really going to be not optional for campaigns, to be successful and really engage the audience. Because I think this is also what an audience kind of has been conditioned to expect. We're conditioned to expect we're going to be reminded, because we know we're going to be distracted and we get pulled back. And so, don't neglect to figure out how you're going to continue to pull those people back in the fold, whether it's through digital advertising, social media, posting through your own channels, or through email messages, and likely a mix of all of those things. The final piece of technology that I wanted to just quickly share is thinking about something called mobile geolocation. And this is really cool, and I think we're going to start to see people apply this for giving days like Giving Tuesday and other types of events, where you're going to determine the time and place that you are going to have an event, or that people that have an affinity for your message will convene. You're going to create a little GPS fence for that target. And then we're going to serve digital ads to people that cross into that zone, right? So you can imagine people on campus, people who have attended an alumni event, people who are attending a sporting event, people who are attending, whatever that might be. If you're having a Giving Tuesday event, if you're having a volunteer event, this is another way to kind of keep your message top of mind. And so I think that we're going to see some creative use for some of this technology. And again, it helps you not just do another cover onto your social media channels, but throughout those digital channels that people are going to be visiting. So while they're on their phones, while they're on their iPads, you're going to be able to reach them through a lot of different means. And I think that this will become even more important. So we'll see some really interesting use for that. And we have colleges and universities using this technology now, and really applying it to events just like Giving Tuesday with great success. So thinking about then, how do you take that and kick it up to the next level? And we get to the second point that we wanted to share with you today, and this is really about your secret weapon, ambassadors. And maybe it's not such a secret weapon, but I like to think of it that way, because we've seen some really incredible and dramatic results of organizations and campuses using ambassadors. And frankly, I think that we as a community have the best ambassadors, right? We have the people that are passionate about being identified as ambassadors, being identified as part of our community, and we have an incredible opportunity to leverage those folks. But how do you do it, right? We all know that that's something that we need to do, but how do we really do that when, again, we're likely doing multiple jobs at once? So let's talk a little bit about that. First, I wanted to share, what we do know about giving is that people are really more likely to give to people, and that comes through in a couple of different ways, right? That comes through because someone I know asked me to give, and I want to give. This is, what we know that this is a huge motivator for giving. We know that we are motivated to give to people because of their story, because of how that affects us, because of the emotional connection and the social connection of that. And then there's also the concept of memorial giving or honoring someone with that gift. But then there's also this people connection, again, like we mentioned at the beginning of the session, that it makes me feel connected to a larger sense of community, and it makes me connected to this larger sense of identity. And this is the power of ambassadors. And we know that that actually campaigns that leverage those ambassadors, we see such a big lift, right? Not just because of the network effect and the reach, but because of the influence of that. So how do we do that? Well, one thing that we have to remember whenever we're asking anyone to do anything, how do we make it really easy for them to do it, right? So we want to make sure that we're leveraging tools and platforms that allow us to have those ambassadors self-identify, have those ambassadors have easy access and reach to tools and content that they need, and to make the barrier of entry pretty low, right? So I think as you start to think about your Giving Tuesday campaign, think about who might be your best ambassadors. Think about the different groups that might be really great champions for your message. And then think about those folks within those groups who might be identified as maybe your power users or your power ambassadors who really are going to help you lead the charge. Even ambassadors need someone to follow, right? Even ambassadors need a little bit of inspiration, even if they're already likely to go ahead and spread your message for them. And so many of our institutions that we work with here at RNL are using our Scale Funder platform to do this, and it's definitely helps them, I think, to extend their effort beyond what they could do by themselves or manually. But there are a lot of things that you can also do within the systems that you might already have, or just through your normal communication channels. But for me, the biggest thing is, how do you lower that barrier of entry for ambassadors and make it really easy for them to say, yes, I want to do it? And so some of the things that we need to think about as we plan our campaigns is, how do we want to organize those folks? So I have 5 key steps of how you do that, and then I can talk a little bit more about how some institutions have done that in the past. But the first thing is really to prepare your own staff and team to understand what are the goals and roles of not just the entire campaign, but for your ambassadors. What are we actually going to ask them to do? And be very specific about that. Be specific about how many ambassadors you think you need. And I think as many as possible is a great thing to say, but I would put a number to that and kind of think about that so you know where you are in terms of your progress. I think that's going to be really key. And then, like I mentioned, how do you recruit those groups with an eye for the champions, that those people you can get on board early. Early adopters will help you then also recruit other ambassadors, not just recruit other participants to your campaign, but recruit them. Make sure that you're cultivating those folks. Then make sure you're really putting together a plan for training the ambassadors. And we've had some great success with higher education institutions, with nonprofits, as well as sororities and fraternities on campus, and those foundations that are really leveraging people to do that. But they have a very specific training program for that. So think about how you're going to do that. How will you deploy that? And I think the best way to do it is through a couple different channels, so that you're kind of covering off different preferences, different ways that people are available, and different ways that they can learn. So that might be in-person events, of course. Food and treats always helps get those folks engaged and on board. But virtual events, calls, teleconferences, any way you can continue to communicate with those people so that they're also clear on your goals and roles and what tools are available to them, which brings me to point number 4. There really needs to be some planning and some thought put into pre-packaged content that these ambassadors can leverage, right? This is, again, how do you lower the barrier of entry? And so this takes a little bit of thinking. What's the theme of your campaign? And I'm sure Heather has some content about how to really think about that. But then how do you carry that through to images, icons, graphics that they can take and use and post to their social media? Do they know the hashtag that they can use? Are there copy and paste messages that these ambassadors can take to not just notify their networks that this campaign is happening or coming up, but to invite them and have really strong calls to action? We've seen great results with ambassadors who just seem to have a natural knack for this, but don't leave that to chance, right? Let's make sure that we have very clear calls to action that reflect the other messages that those people might see throughout the campaign, the message that they're going to see leading up to build excitement, the message they're going to see the day before, the messages that they're going to see on social media, in advertisements, on the website, in emails the day of, and so make sure that that's all consistent. And then just make sure it's really easy to use and that they know that it's available. And so you can create, without too much effort, a quick, what I would call a mini media kit for those people, a little ambassador kit that includes all of these things. And then with really explicit instructions on how and when they should post it. And then, the other important thing, I think, particularly for any kind of ambassadors, but specifically for Giving Tuesday, I think, is celebrating that progress along the way. And, for those individual people who are doing a great job, as well as people who might need a little encouragement, and then also celebrating that overall success. So how are you keeping those ambassadors engaged with that progress that everyone is making? And then really, celebrating individual accomplishments. They've, been able to bring in 10 people into the campaign. They've raised, X amount of money, have milestones, have, you might consider having rewards for those people. It doesn't have to be a lot. It could just be a little image that you post for them on social media that references them and gives them a shout out. You'd be surprised at how motivating and exciting that can be, and that actually leverages or motivates more activity on those folks. So think about how you're going to celebrate that, and it's not just training them and equipping them and letting them go. It's really, again, keeping that excitement up, not just for the entire audience, but for those ambassadors. And so that's a quick glimpse of how you might think about those ambassadors. But one thing I did want to mention as we think about those ambassadors is thinking about how you're going to track that activity, thinking about how you're going to make sure you understand who's on board. You're going to understand how many people have actually activated. You're going to understand how many people have been able to bring in a certain amount of activity, whether that's donors, dollars, pledges, whatever it might be. It's really hard to manage what you can't measure, and so I would encourage you, if you're going to go down this route and put some effort into Giving Tuesday and engage those ambassadors, have a process or a platform to be able to track and measure that, because I think those ambassadors are really the people that you're going to be able to go back to over time. You're going to be able to get valuable insight from them. They're likely to be continued champions for your programs and your institutions. And so having good records on that, I think, is one of the things that I'm really passionate about, because I think you're going to be able to derive so much insight from it. So don't get so caught up in the one day of Giving Tuesday that you lose sight of all of the prep, which I know Heather will say is extremely important, but also all of the follow-up and the insight and the learnings that you're going to get out of it, throughout the entire process, I think, is going to be extremely important. So, thinking about Giving Tuesday coming up, and I'm excited. I remember when Giving Tuesday was just getting started, and I'm so impressed and just exhilarated, frankly, to see the amount of impact and the amount of reach that's been able to happen over the last 5 years, and I can't wait to see what's going to happen this year. But thinking about how do you really unite and rally your community, to me, this is the key for Giving Tuesday success overall. And I've had a lot of experience doing this for various reasons, but none that have been so rewarding as rallying people around something like Giving Tuesday. So first things first, you got to make sure you're planning ahead. You got to start now if you haven't started already. Think really clearly about what are the things you want to accomplish, and then how do you really focus on the most important things. You will want to do everything, but you probably won't be able to, so pick off the things that you can do and then organize your team around that. How are you going to create that drumbeat of excitement through what I call social surround sound, right? Using all of the channels available to you, and then using all of the amplification techniques through owned, earned, and paid, through consistent messaging. And then to number 3, how are you going to leverage that amplification? By tapping into the network, right, with your well-equipped ambassadors. And what's the plan for them? You have an overall plan for your Giving Tuesday, but I see a little sub-plan in there that's all about your ambassadors. And like I mentioned, we've seen really great results with the organizations who get that and who plan and really put a lot of time into those ambassadors, because they know that's really going to be the key to not just bringing on ambassadors, but bringing on everybody else. So Heather, do you want me to go ahead and dig into some questions?
Yeah, I'll throw these out to you. That was really great, Caryn. Thank you so much. That's great advice. You did mention a few things. I heard my name related to online ambassadors and some additional information there. And we do have a lot of great content, as I mentioned earlier, I think, on the Giving Tuesday website, givingtuesday.org. Soon we'll be launching a Giving givingtuesday.org page specific to higher ed too. So I'll be announcing that in our monthly email for the audience. But feel free at any point in time to go out to givingtuesday.org and look for our free resources, and you'll see a lot of good guidance there on working with ambassadors. But Caryn, here's 3 questions that I've gotten from our audience. I just wanted to lob these out to you and see if you could share some thoughts with the folks. So the first one is they were curious where your higher ed clients are with 2017 planning. As we're recording this webinar, it's August, early August. So, where are your clients? Are they planning? Are they getting ready to plan? Kind of when do things get started?
Yeah, I think what we see, to some degree is a little bit across the board. I think we have folks that are already have this on their calendar. They already have this on either their alumni engagement calendar or their development calendar, all across the board. And so they've got some high level goals in place, and now I think they're starting to really dig into a little bit more of the tactical, in terms of how to deploy that. And so, to Heather's point, we want to make sure that people are planning ahead as early as possible, because for a couple different reasons, right? The more planning you do, the more successful we think you're going to be. It's going to give you a little bit more chance to align everyone on your team and start to prep and make sure you have all of the assets that you need, from creative to copy to any events that you might have, and really think about how all that stuff's going to tie together, not just within your Giving Tuesday campaign, but how does that Giving Tuesday campaign fit into your overall strategy. The other side of that, though, that we often see is that we do have some folks that come to us in maybe what we would consider to be a little bit last minute, and so that's not to say that there aren't things that you can do, but obviously, by and large, we would hope that at least most people have their large overarching plan in place, and now they're really just starting to dig into specifics of how that's going to get deployed, understanding some of the very granular details about their let's say the content and the flow for their ambassadors. What's the right amount of time to plan for that? How many events might they have? How many trainings might they have? And also to allow for some of that learning to happen within that process. If you have a training, you might learn some things that you want to be able to roll into some other waves of that ambassador recruitment. we have an interesting case study on the site, and I think we've got a link for folks to be able to pick that up as well, from one of our clients who knew they wanted to do a giving day, but I think for various reasons didn't really get the approval and the go-ahead until a little bit later in the game, and we were able to help them do that as well, but preferably for everyone's sake, to have all the tools that you need and to also not have the stress, to be able to kind of enjoy the process as you go along, would definitely recommend. If you haven't started planning, now is the time. So it's always an interesting question. Giving Tuesday, just like any other event, it's not just you don't just show up and it happens. And I think that the time allows you to pull the right people together and start to build on that versus just kind of deploying a campaign and hoping it works.
Great. So the next two questions are sort of related, and you did you covered a lot of this during your presentation, but I'll just lob this out to make sure there wasn't anything else that sort of sprung to mind. So our audience, we have a lot of folks who this will be their first year doing a Giving Tuesday campaign in higher ed, or it's their second year and they're looking to grow. So, if there's one thing in social media that's new this year, maybe, what is that? So, and what should they not overlook? So you talked a lot about mobile and some of the retargeting, which I think is really good advice. But if there's another thing that's new in social media now that you think they could try, and then secondly, for those folks on the phone with small teams, if they could only focus on one or two social media channels, what do you recommend?
Yeah, those are great questions, and I think they kind of tie together. So, beyond thinking about the digital advertising opportunities, I think the key thing, in social media that you shouldn't overlook, it's probably not necessarily new, but I think something that a lot of people haven't explored as much. I think we've got kind of this crawl, walk, run mentality, and we're maybe getting past the crawl stage and we're getting into the walking stage. But I think for social media, it's really about how you leverage the ability to target specific audiences with specific messages, and that some of that functionality is native within the platform. Sometimes you got to do a little bit of manipulation there. I think it's worth exploring. Whether you do it within the platform, whether you do it with a service, whether you do it with advertising, I think it's really worth exploring, because I think that what we see is that the more relevant, the more specific, and the more personal the communication, the better the results, because this is what we expect now. We expect to have an incredibly personalized and somewhat self-directed experience, right? We think that the online world and the digital world, the mobile world is all about us, right? And this is good to some degree, but we have to now, we as organizers, as marketers, as fundraisers now have to be on board with that and not treat everybody the same. So I think that's one key thing that I think will be very powerful for people as they look through social media. Now, Heather, you and I were talking earlier, too, just about thinking of how are people really leveraging the visual aspect of social media. And I think this is critically important, and it becomes even more important, particularly as we see really great images and really great video not being as hard or as expensive to create as it might you have been in the past. And so I think using that, knowing that that's what people react to, knowing that it's easy for me to go onto my smartphone on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or Snapchat and see that and react to it. Most of these platforms are visual, thinking about Instagram, thinking about Snapchat. So figure out what your visual identity is, I think, is going to be really key, because that's going to be what ties it together. We're going to be able to react more quickly. We're going to be able to make that connection more quickly if you have a strong visual impact and a style to that. So I think that's a key thing. And then, if I think about those teams who are thinking, well, I can only do so much, right? Gets actually back to my question, or my answer to question number 2, which is then figure out where your people are. Don't try to drag people to where you are. Try to go to where they are. And I've learned some hard lessons this way in my career, and I think it's so important. And it's one of those things that sounds very simple, but it's often easy to forget, right? We feel like, well, we already set up our Facebook, and there it is. But if no one's there, that's not going to do you much good. So I would say if you could only focus on one or two things, spend some time in this planning phase, do a little bit of research, do maybe some surveying or some polling, or get a focus group together and figure out where they are. And focus your efforts there, because it's not going to do you any good to cover all these channels if the activity really isn't there. So I would say it's going to be highly dependent on the institution. It's going to be highly dependent on your campaign. If you have a very specific campaign for your Giving Tuesday efforts, then figure out where that's most relevant, because I think you're going to save yourself a lot of time. You're going to save yourself some money, and you're going to save some sanity, frankly, on where you're going to be spending a lot of that last part of the year.
Great. Well, we could all use a little extra sanity saving. So thanks again for that good advice. Great. So just want to wrap things up for our audience. If you have some additional questions for Caryn, or just wanted to dig in a little bit more to the information she presented, on screen we've shared Caryn's contact information, her email, and her Twitter handle. And I know that she'll be more than happy to hear from any of you and provide some additional insight.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I do really, and I sincerely believe that, Heather, I would just say definitely reach out to me. I've seen a lot of this over the last couple of years, working with Heather previously, working on Giving Tuesday campaigns and lots of other one-day campaigns. There's a lot to explore, but I know it can be a little daunting sometimes, and Heather and Giving Tuesday have such great information. They're great conveners of so many resources. I definitely encourage you to take advantage of those, but take advantage of a lot of the folks out there, and I include myself, that really do want to help and love to hear how things are going for you as well.
Great. And then did you want to talk a little bit about the Giving Day Success Kit? Really,
yeah, definitely.
That generous offer for our audience also.
Yeah, so we do have a Giving Day Success Kit. You can click on this link or type it in and go there. Got a couple different resources there, and we'll be adding some new things, throughout the next few weeks that include some case studies that really walk through how different institutions have approached this, and a lot of them are highly dependent on ambassadors. Some of them are dependent on some digital outreach in terms of the advertising as well as the social media. So I think you'll find a lot of good nuggets in there. And we've got a couple of other resources, including a couple other webinars and some other things that we've packaged together. So you can kind of go there, find that, and we'll continue to be adding on to that over the next few weeks. So it'll be a good resource. Okay,
great. Awesome. So that is also on screen, and Caryn, we'll add that to our website too, if you don't mind, and we'll push that out through our social media channels so we can get that in front of a bunch of folks. So appreciate you sharing that. That'd be great. And then also, and lastly, I have my email on screen. So if there's folks that have questions for me or for the Giving Tuesday team, my email is hfieldsmarketing@gmail.com, and I'm always available to you to answer questions, to offer some free support and advice, and connect you to other resources as well. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And that about wraps it up for us today. I thank you so much for joining us. And Caryn, again, thank you. And I hope everybody has a fabulous afternoon. Take care.
Thanks, Heather.
Bye-bye.